let's get started. So let me introduce Cal, officially Kalman Chany. So I've had the pleasure of talking to Cal over the past few weeks, and we've had fun, and Cal put the presentation together, but just talking about, what we were going to focus on tonight. There's a lot, even if it was a normal year, but this is like a slightly not normal year because there are changes coming, and he's going to touch upon that. Cal is a nationally recognized expert on college funding. He's the author of the Princeton Review book called Paying for College. And I didn't realize, but this is the 30th edition that just came out last week. And Cal has written it from the beginning. So that's a tremendous accomplishment. And we are only going to benefit from all of his knowledge tonight. So I think I've gone through everything that everybody needs to know, and I'm going to really pass it off to Cal. I'm going to monitor the chat, but he's got a ton that he's going to share with everybody tonight.
Great, thank you so much. And I want to thank Road to College, especially Debbie and their whole team, for allowing me the opportunity to present to you this evening. Just one thing to be aware of, financial aid's complicated. This slide deck is rather comprehensive. I'm not going to be reading the slides. I'm going to be touching on certain points to get through the material, which it may take a few times to absorb. And that's the benefit with Road to College, that you'll be getting information sometime probably tomorrow midday on how you'll be able to view the video again. Repetition fixes firmly. So without that, we're going to go on first. And the lawyers told me to say this, but we have to give the disclaimer. My presentation is my only opinion. It's not the, I'm not speaking on behalf of Random House, my publisher, Penguin Random House, or the Princeton Review, who co-produces the book with Penguin Random House, nor Road to College. And then if you need legal advice or other expert assistance, you should contact a competent professional. I also want to give a shout out to my writer. I know Debbie said I've written a book for 30 years. Jeff Martz, he is my writer. He's worked with me for 30 years. I tend to be a bit of a policy wonk, but he puts the information together, not knowing much and figuring, well, I'm a parent. How would I understand this? So that makes it very user-friendly, the material in the book. So now this is what we're going to cover today, the crystal ball there, the economics of higher ed, some other points, especially the aid eligibility criteria, the application process, and as Debbie alluded to earlier, the federal update, because there are going to be tectonic changes coming to the student aid landscape in a few years. But you're going to learn tonight why it's important to plan now for those changes because of the way the aid eligibility is determined. And then we just have some things about getting some more help. So most people think of school, the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, but for higher ed, it's revenue, rankings, and ratings. So that's the important thing to realize, as we stress in the book, that college is a business. And there have been many articles about this lately, about schools
Unmute.
Cal, I think you're muted.
press anything. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sorry about that.
Okay, no, that's okay. So I'll start with this slide. I imagine it just cut out recently, right?
You were talking about the 3 R's.
The 3 R's, okay. So that's revenue, rankings, and ratings. So in terms of revenue for the schools, in terms of really how that relates to financial aid, other people's money that the school gets from the federal government in terms of students applying for aid or state aid programs or outside scholarships are not a reduction in revenue for the school. It's the same as if you're paying the money to the school out of your own pocket. So they like that OPM, that other people's money. Now, hold on. Now the slides, they're not advancing. Hold on. I'll do a new share. I don't know why that happened, but I'm going to do a new share here so I can get the screen going. That's what I want to have. We're going to start from the beginning. Here we go. And okay, so now
Okay.
does it look okay?
Yes,
All right,
yes.
thank you. Okay, so the revenue has a big impact, the money also on those rankings that you all look at, the US News and World Report. In fact, 52% of the rankings are based upon that. Financial resources per student, social mobility, how many kids get the Pell. Alumni satisfaction is how many alumni give at least $5 once a year, which is why they have giving days. Indebtedness, retention, faculty compensation. So it's not all about the students, what you're told about, it's all about the money. Now, the bond ratings are also important, and they're based on the US News and World Report rankings, as well as the revenue. This is the ratings. If a school wants to build a dormitory, what's the interest rate they're going to be paying on that bond issue that they're putting out there into the financial markets? The overall outlook is not so great. That's in part because of the declining demographics. In a few years, they're going to be much less 18-year-olds, traditional students going off to college. But the schools are very focused on their rankings and their revenue. If your rankings go down at a school, your career in admissions, if they go down a bit, if you're a higher end executive, it's probably going to be over. So schools focus on the rankings tremendously because the money is so important. Now, the lay of the land. Many people think admissions is a meritocracy. It's not. There's subcategories of admission: athletes, legacies, development, international. You're competing against those. But the other key point is the financial aid leveraging. That is so big now. You've seen articles probably about that with the algorithms that private consultants are selling to the colleges, or the colleges are using themselves to try to ascertain what is the maximum amount we can charge you before you cry uncle and go to another school. So they're leveraging their limited aid dollars. They don't award aid so much as they ration it out. And so you need to understand also too, when you're getting information about paying for that, there's information from the consumer, but there's also the higher education industry's perspective. The colleges don't want you to know, for example, about the financial aid leveraging and all that. People would just get upset. So first things first, it's very important not to panic. The schools want you to be excited about this, stressed very well. They're pushing the emotional buttons, fear of missing out, etc. It's very important not to panic so that you make rational decisions instead of emotional decisions in terms of going through the process. So you want to be a savvy consumer, make sure your information is correct and accurate. And remember, when the schools tell you at information sessions that they're educators, the people in admissions, the people who work in financial aid are not generally educators. They are not members of the faculty. They're the support service of admissions. So always remember, this was in the New York Times decades ago. Remember, the people at the colleges work for the school. They don't work for you. They're not charities at these colleges. Now, in terms of aid, of course, and you want to be getting as much aid as you can. There's two main types of the assistance. The first is the merit money. That's based on your talent or ability of the student. And then there's the need-based money, which is based on your ability to pay. Now, in terms of the merit money, I'm going to get to that in a second, but the need-based money, they have a formula to determine how much aid you're eligible to receive. So they're going to take the cost of the school, the tuition fees, room, board, books, transportation, personal expenses, billable charges, plus allowances for out-of-pocket expenses, and they're going to subtract, based on formulas, what they determine you can contribute. Now, there are two main formulas. One is the federal methodology. That's established by Congress and administered by the United States Department of Education. The schools have to follow that. The other is the institutional methodologies. The College Board uses that institutional methodology for many schools, but other schools might do their own institutional methodology, or IM. The IM is what they use to award their own money if they're asking for detailed aid forms in addition to the federal application for aid known as the FAFSA. And it's important to realize that the demonstrated need is not necessarily how much aid you're going to get. It's how much aid you're eligible for. And it's important to realize most schools gap students. Gapping means even though you might demonstrate need for X amount of money, you get X minus something. There's a gap between the demonstrated need and how much aid you actually get. And we're going to talk about that a little later, because at some schools, the gapping is significant, and doing things to increase your eligibility for aid aren't necessarily going to help you one penny in terms of getting more aid. The other thing to realize is merit aid, the school is going to determine that first for the student, and most schools give out merit money. And then if you have remaining need, then they package you for the need-based aid. So it's really cost minus what you can pay minus the merit money equals your remaining need for need-based assistance. So what route you take is going to depend in part on the type of school you're looking at. Are you looking at a community college where the student's going to live at home? Are you looking at a four-year public institution as an in-state student, or a four-year public student as an out-of-state student? And that's very different, the in-state and out-of-state, because given cutbacks by state governments, more and more public universities are relying on more and more out-of-state students to subsidize the in-state students, because they charge the out-of-staters several multiples of the in-state tuition rate, and it's very hard to become an in-stater. Then there are the four-year privates. And each institution has their own policies and procedures. So this is a decentralized process. It is not similar to how you do your taxes, where you're just dealing with the Internal Revenue Service and your state agency. Every school is in part calling the shots. Now they have to follow the federal rules and regulations, but that's important to realize. So that's why many people in higher ed will always say the answer to every question about college funding is, it depends, because it depends on your situation. It depends on which state you live in. It depends on the colleges you're looking at. It depends on the student's academic profile. And that's why it's hard to give a cookbook recipe of what to follow. Now, you also want to be aware of, when you're filing the forms, when is the optimal time to file them? And we're going to get to that a little bit shortly. It's not the Oklahoma land rush to get the money. Okay, so the merit money. Most cases, other than athletic awards, athletic scholarships for Division I, Division II schools, if you have a talented athletic child, you know what those are, Division I, Division II. Those are the highest level of competition on the collegiate level. So those are done through the athletic department, but the other merit award for academics, for creative talent, for performing arts, those are offered through the admissions office. Now, they don't give you that money because your child is an exceptional student. Every aid office, every college behind closed doors will tell you they give that money out solely to buy grades and to buy rankings, because there's a saying also too in college, the bottom half of the class finances the top half of the class. So they know how much money they need to give you through their algorithms, et cetera, to get you to go to your second choice school versus your first choice school. And that's what they're using merit money. The Wall Street Journal even said weapons in the admissions war. That's why they're giving that money. Of course, you feel happy your child got it, you pat yourself on the back, but make no mistake, it's done to affect what school your child will go to, because you'll at some point may consider your second or third choice. Now, you have to know with that, there are separate procedures to be considered for them. In some cases, you may need to apply before the traditional admission deadlines to be considered for merit scholarships. There may be extra applications you have to do. If you're going for performing art awards, you may have to submit a portfolio or a video of a performance if you're going for that special talent. So you want to see what those are. The best source is going to be the school itself. That's true for everything. But for tuition and fee scholarship, that'll be on the admissions website. For the need-based aid, you want to look at the school's financial aid website. So you may have to get those applications in earlier. In part, that's done to harvest applications, because many of these schools know if you wait till you're going on early decision to another college and you get in, you will never bother to apply if you get a decision to decide to go there. So they're going to have deadlines maybe for some of these scholarships in November, early December, before the early decision are made and the students are notified about it. And you may need to apply for need-based aid to be considered for those awards, even to be turned down for the assistance. Because again, they're looking at the competitors. What are they giving you need-based money? We give you merit money, maybe you'll come to us instead. And then you want to know, of course, what's the criteria of renewal? Are there minimum grade point averages? What do you have to do to keep getting those funds over all 4 years? Now, need-based aid. Lots of myths, and I used an Old Norse mythology image there because these myths have had a long time dying. They're still believed by most people that you need to file a tax return to do the FAFSA, to do the aid forms. Not surprising because the instructions say when you're going on there, have your tax return ready. You don't have to. You don't have to file a return if you're not required to do so. You don't have to file one and you can still qualify for it. You don't have to be employed. Unfortunately, a lot of people are unemployed. We're going to talk about special considerations for those people a little bit later. The amount of aid, as we saw from that example, is also based on the cost of the school. So you shouldn't rule out any school as being too expensive. And then the biggest myth is to assume, or two biggest ones, the college is a charity. They're going to help you. You need to think of them more like the IRS because of their algorithms. They're trying to figure out what's the least amount of aid to give you. So you have to have a very good poker face and some ice in your veins with this process if you want to get the most aid possible. Now, the other big myth is that the sooner you apply, the more money you will get. That will be true for some students, for state aid in some states, and maybe a handful of colleges. But most schools will have priority filing deadlines where if you file weeks or even months before that deadline, or you file right at the deadline, or some cases even a little later, you'll be getting the same consideration for the money. So again, it's not the Oklahoma land rush. And it's important to remember there are no participation awards. And as we'll see later, you can't change your information, what you submitted in many cases, you're locked in. So timing is very important with this process. You want to apply when you're going to show the most eligibility for the assistance. Now, you don't have to memorize this chart, but this is just to show you that it's not as simple as filling out the form and the money comes. It has to go through this big bureaucracy created by the U.S. Department of Education. There's about 10 to 14,000 pages of federal regulations that schools must follow when they're awarding federal aid. Many people think that the primary role of the aid office of the college is to help students and give them financial aid. It's not. Their primary role is to make sure that the college remains compliant with the thousands of pages of regulations. Because if they're not, and there's a program review by the government and they're not compliant, the school could lose their eligibility for aid. And if that happens like that, the school is going to be closed. So it's very important. That's their primary role. So you have to fit into this complex system to get the money. You might feel you need it, but you have to demonstrate the need. And you can see this chart even is very good because it shows the government is over the colleges. They're over the aid office. They are terrified in the aid offices of a program review. Some schools have failed to follow procedures. They've been fined 10,000. I think the record was 10 million. I think the record was $17 million fine. And with that many thousands of pages of regulations, they're going to find something you're not doing. So nobody in the college wants to risk program reviews. Now, the filing requirement is going to vary. People talked about this last week. The best source is the college itself. Go on their website, look what they are. And if you're going early decision, which is that binding process, or early action, or a regular decision, or you're a student already in college reapplying for aid, or a transfer applicant, those deadlines very often will be different based on the category of the students. When you go on the websites, make sure you're looking at the one for undergraduate students. If you use your favorite search engine, oftentimes you'll get it for, you want for undergraduates. Sometimes you'll see the graduate student deadlines. Those are different. And you want to be sure you're in the right admissions category of what goes on. Some schools for early action, they'll have the same deadlines as regular decision. But early decision, those deadlines are going to start probably at ED schools, ED1 schools. the beginning of November. They're going to be either concurrent with the admissions application deadlines or shortly thereafter, because they have to give the package to the student if you're applying for aid with the admission decision in December, so you can decide, are we going early decision, and that's it. Now, I'm going to talk about these forms later. The free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA form. It's a form. It's not an agency that gives out money. When you hear them say FAFSA didn't give me any money, that tells you they don't know how the system operates. So FAFSA, think of it as the same as the IRS 1040. It's just a form. It's not the Internal Revenue Service. So it's a form. And again, it's decentralized. The form is processed. So you saw that on that chart. And then it goes through the meat grinder. And eventually the results go to the colleges you designate to receive your information. Many schools, though, say the FAFSA is too simplistic, especially those schools that give out their own institutional money based on need and have large amounts of money set aside for it. They view the FAFSA form as too simple. So they're going to require the College Board CSS Financial Aid Profile form, which in these slides, they don't use that, but I refer to them all in capital letters, profile, so that you know I'm referring to a specific document and not just saying, well, the student's academic profile or something like that. Beyond that, they may want institutional forms completed. Some, like Penn, will want the FAFSA, University of Pennsylvania, the FAFSA, the profile. They're going to want their own Penn institutional aid form. They're going to want tax returns. So it's very good to have a chart of all this and keep track of things, and to remain alert. Once you submit the application, they send you things, but some schools don't. So you want to be sure you know who wants what, when they want it, which can get confusing if you're applying to 10, 15, 20, or we have some people I've seen apply to 25 or more schools, which is crazy, but you're, again, dealing like the equivalent with your taxes with 25 different foreign governments. They all have their own rules. They all have their own requirements, their own deadlines. Now, I'm going to use the term in this presentation, simple situation, to refer to situations with these 10 categories: relatively low income, below 50,000. If the parents are married, they're either married or there's no non-custodial parent information. In other words, they only want information from one parent. If a tax filer and you're working, the only income is from W-2, no Schedule C self-employment, no corporations, no partnerships, assets less than $10,000, student has no assets. And if you're a tax filer, you don't file Schedule 1 to report some of your income and certain adjustments to income, and you did not receive 2020 unemployment benefits. So this is somebody who's working, they work for somebody else or not working at all. They don't have much assets. They don't have any stock. There's no money in the kid's name. That's the simple situation. Anything other than that, there's opportunities to do things to maximize your eligibility for aid, and you need to be more careful. So for people with simple situations, though, your key is to look at schools that are going to meet a high percentage of your need and going to fund you, because it doesn't do any good if they gap you and you have those limited resources and say, well, borrow $50,000 a year and you're making $40,000. That's suicidal to do something like that, but it could happen. So you want to look at schools that will do that. And generally, those would be private colleges where the student's academic profile is going to make them a target or a safety school, not a reach school, unless the school guarantees to meet 100% of demonstrated need, like the Ivy League schools do, my alma mater, Lehigh, does. Some of the other very selective private colleges will do that. So now, do we want to stop? It's 9 o'clock.
Keep going, because I don't have the names yet. So
okay, good. Okay, good. So you want to, again, make that chart. Do not outsource this process to your child if your child's a 17 or 18-year-old. That, I agree with Michelle Singletary of the Washington Post. She agrees with me that is a recipe for disaster. The kids don't have much skin in the game. Mistakes can be costly, And remember that they're taking snapshots of your situation. So when you apply, you want to be very careful about doing that. Because you can't Photoshop things. Once you submit the FAFSA especially, you're locked in. Now, you're going to hear this concept about the FSA ID. FSA ID, if you say FSA, it sounds like FAFSA, it's not. That stands for Federal Student Aid ID. And that's a key to be able to use certain tools on the U.S. Department of Student Aid website, including electronically signing the FAFSA, electronically signing federal loan applications, and doing some other things, adding additional schools to the FAFSA. So the FSA ID is a good thing to have. And if you're a dependent student, your child is, say, the typical 17 or 18-year-old, dependent on the parents, one of the parents in the student's household also must have their own unique FSA ID, which is a unique username and a case-sensitive password. The password can be the same, and then they're going to want to verify either the email address and or the mobile phone for that person. It needs to be unique to them, their email address or their mobile phone. Initially, it's provisional, but after a few days, they'll verify the information. Be careful you plug in the social security number right, date of birth, and use the person's legal name.
Okay, Cal, I do have the name, so let me just.
Okay, great, thank you.
Cal, so 3 people were chosen, and Mindy is going to put them in the chat. So congratulations to Teresa Ritter, Chris Lien, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Lien, and Heidi Landry. So congratulations, you guys will get a signed copy of the Paying for College book, and just look, Mindy's going to put her email address in there because we need to get your address, your physical address, to send you the book. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so there's a myth out there. Most people say the FAFSA is the most important form. That, again, depends. If the school wants other more detailed forms, those are going to be equally important or even more important than the FAFSA form. But it's very important that all the information be consistent from form to form, because the federal government says to the colleges, if you have inconsistent data, you have to resolve the inconsistency. So you want to make hay slowly with the process. Now, most students are dependent, unless they're orphans or wards of the court, legal dependents of the spouse over 24 years of age. By January of the academic year, they're seeking aid. They're veterans of the armed forces, are currently serving in the armed forces for purposes other than training. It's very hard for a typical 17 or 18-year-old going from high school into college, the demographic of this presentation, to be independent students. So while the student is the applicant for aid, the parental information is going to be required on that student's FAFSA form to determine your eligibility for aid. And which parents' information they want is based upon their living arrangements of the 2 biological or adopted parents. If they're living together, regardless of their gender, regardless of their marital status, you could be divorced and living with your ex, they're going to want both parents' information on the form, same as if you're married. They're going to want that. Now, if you're living apart, then currently, under the current rules for the upcoming year, and this is going to change later, we'll talk about this, they're only interested in the information of the parent with whom the child spent the most time, 12 months before the aid forms are completed. So currently, they don't care who claims the child as a dependent. It's physical presence. If that's exactly tied, then it's going to be which one provides the greater support. Now, if the custodial parent has remarried, the income and assets of that step parent that's married to the custodial parent will be requested and analyzed on the FAFSA form as if it was that of the natural parent. So if you're thinking of remarrying during your child's college years, I suggest you postpone the wedding bells until after the student has graduated, especially if that spouse of yours is going to have significant financial circumstances, because maybe the first year you get money, then the nest is empty, you remarry, and then you find out when you apply again, now they want your new spouse's information that's knocking you out of the box for the assistance. Now, The FAFSA form is going to look at PPY income. That stands for prior year. That's the only thing, though, that they really look at based on 2 years ago. Everything else, the marital status of the student, the marital status of the parents, the asset situation, the household size, everything else is based upon what is your situation on the day the FAFSA is filed. But for income, they're generally looking back 2 years. That's what you have to report on the form. Now, if it changes, we'll talk about that a little bit later, say you lost your job, et cetera, how to handle that. But on the form, you must report PPY income. Easy way to figure that out. Whatever academic year you're seeking aid, you subtract 2 from the fall terms year, and that gives you the PPY. So if your child's a senior starting college in the 22-23 academic year, in the fall of 2022, you subtract 2 from that. And so 2020 will be the PPY income on the 22-23 FAFSA form. The next year you have to reapply. So 23-24, subtract 2 from 23, that gets you 21. That's going to be the income we're looking at, which is in the calendar year that we're in now. Now there's an online version of the form. There are benefits to doing that. You can look at it later, but generally you can put more schools on there. You get to skip more of the questions, and you can pull your information from the IRS and import it onto the form. That's called the IRS data retrieval tool. Currently, you're transferred to the IRS. You're telling them to transfer the data to the FAFSA. In the future years, the Department of Ed is going to go right in to the IRS database, and that extra step will be skipped. So they can pull that information. Generally speaking, to get that, if you file electronically, it's got to be 2 weeks since you filed your tax return electronically before that information will be ready to be pulled with the IRS DRT. If you mail it in, it could take longer. Now, there's a huge difference, again, between applying for financial aid and applying in such a way so that you will get the most assistance. And they're going to take a snapshot of your situation again on the day the FAFSA is submitted. And that can impact your aid for several years, because the first year's award in many cases is a template for future years. They know about your situation. They know if you're trying to do things later on, you're learning a little bit about the game to get more money, but you sent in anything the first year. Some schools will even do level funding, and the aid is based for the 4 years based on what you did the first year, although those schools are in the minority. Now, unlike the tax return, where if you did something wrong in your return, you added up the numbers wrong, you should have gotten more money than you did, the IRS will correct that, they'll send you the money. Here, they're only interested in over awarding. There's very little done to tap you on the shoulders. In fact, nothing to say, you could have filled it out this way and got more money. It's only if you got more money than you should be getting. That's everything that's done. That's all the schools have to do, especially too with the Department of Ed. So you want to be especially careful when you're reporting your assets and with questions regarding IRS 1040 Schedule 1. Because there's certain questions about that can influence whether or not they're going to look at your assets.
So, Cal, can I just ask a question? I know I wasn't going to, but
that's fine.
But I've seen this question a lot before this. You mentioned the DRT and using that, but are there some situations where that system has had problems, and particularly if somebody has done an IRA rollover?
Okay. That's a very good question. And it's 2 answers. There have been technical problems with it. The past couple of weeks, there have been technical problems with the DRT. Very hard to pull the data. There are also certain situations where you're not given the well, actually, there are 3. There are situations where you're not able to use the IRS DRT. You're not even invited and given the opportunity to use it. That mostly happens with 2 situations. One, the parents are separated, but they file a joint return because the DRT is not going to segregate which part of the income on the return is the custodial parents and which is the non-custodial parents. There are also cases, if you were victims of identity theft with the IRS, the tool will not work. That's not a problem. Again, it also won't work if your form wasn't processed. Ideally, if you can use it, you should use it. It's going to encrypt your data. If you change the data, it's a problem. Now, if you roll over money from one retirement account and it was a qualified rollover to another account, you have to be very careful. It's going to use the IRS data retrieval tool, but it's going to have a pop-up window. And it's going to tell you with the pop-up window, did you have a rollover? And that's important because rollovers are not considered income. If you don't indicate you had a rollover, it's going to ask you how much you rolled over. It's going to overstate your income.
Right.
And once you do that the first time, you can't go back there and change it. You
Right.
have to then go manually change it, get a copy of your student aid report. It's a total disaster. Again, don't have your child do this. Make haste slowly. And before you hit submit, you want to be very careful.
Okay. Thanks.
So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, that was good.
Okay. So primary residence is not reported on the FAFSA. That's where you live. But any real estate other than your primary residence is going to count. So if you rent your primary residence and have property in the country, you might think of that as your home for aid. That's not your primary residence. Now, if you have a multi-family dwelling of your primary residence, say a townhouse, and you rent out some floors, you have a two-family house, the part of the home that's rented out, if it has a separate entrance, a separate bathroom, and a separate kitchen, that is not part of your home and needs to be considered, the equity in that, as part of your other real estate and investments. So it's you have to be very careful with that. Then there are other assets that they have, generally the plain vanilla financial assets that are not in retirement accounts, that are not in annuities, that are not in insurance products. So again, you may want to look at this later, a second time to go over that. They will tell you on the form also what to include on the form. I'm sorry, Debbie, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead. Nope.
Okay.
You're good.
Then what about debts and businesses? They're not viewing a statement of your net worth like you do when you go for a loan. The only debts that matter are debts against your assets. So it could be a passbook loan on a savings account. It could be margin debt on a investment portfolio. It could be a mortgage on a piece of other real estate, like your second home. Those debts reduce the net asset, the assets you have to determine your net asset. So they're not looking at your net worth. Businesses, farms, those are considered, they're somewhat sheltered, and they're especially sheltered currently for a family business or a family farm. Family business is a business with 100 or fewer full-time or full-time equivalent employees, where you and other members of your family, by blood or by marriage, own at least 50% controlling interest in that business or that partnership. So a self-employed person owns 100%. If you own a corporation with your mother-in-law and your cousin, and you each own a third, well, that family would own 100% of the business. But if you own that partnership with two other partners you're unrelated to, you would have 33%. That would not be a family business. Family farm means on Schedule F of the tax return, you're able to check that you materially participate in the farm's operation. Now, if you have a family business or a family farm, you're not going to report the equity of that business entity on the FAFSA form, but other forms you're required to report it generally, whether or not it's a family business or a family farm. And again, the asset value is the current market value of the form of the FAFSA the day the FAFSA is completed. You might be filling out other forms on other days, and they'll tell you, what is your value today? No. Today, for other forms like the College Board profile, means the day you filed the FAFSA. Stocks could go up and down. The money in your bank account goes up and down. You put down different numbers. They're going to then want possibly the kitchen sink because they're going to say, we have inconsistent data. And that's why it's very important with the FAFSA that you ignore this advice that you might read in most cases to file the FAFSA as soon as possible. You'll get more money. Because if you file that form and your EFC is higher than it could possibly be, all things being equal at a school with a priority filing deadline, that's later, you're not in a state that gives money out that way on a first come, first served basis. We'll talk about that soon. You're going to get less aid generally. So that's very important about filing the FAFSA because guidance counselors, if you're in a public high school, they participate in the FAFSA completion program. The head of the school district is pressuring the principal, who's pressuring the guidance counselor, who's pressuring the kids, get the FAFSAs in, file as soon as possible. You'll get more money if they do that. The reason they're doing it is because the schools, they're tracking how many kids at that high school, the department head is tracking how many kids file the form. As far as the school district, maybe superintendent's concerned, if 100% of the kids file the FAFSA form and not one kid gets a penny of financial aid, that was a successful process because all they care about at the high school is how many kids filled out the form. It doesn't matter how much or how little aid they give. So if your child's getting pressured about that, and you'll learn later when to file the form, just ignore what they tell you from the high school. And they're going to say the first thing is to do the FAFSA. The reality is if you have other forms to complete, they're going to be more difficult. It's going to be easier to do those other forms first, not submit anything, and then make sure everything's all jiving the responses with each other before you submit anything. So again, timing is very important here. Now, contribution from assets. Again, that's why the timing matters, because when you file the FAFSA, parental assets are assessed much less heavily than student assets. Student assets are assessed maybe 4 to 5 times the amount of parental assets, depending upon the formula. Parents get some protection, not much, but they get some protection also too from some of their reportable assets. So you want to be careful about that. Now, one of the biggest mistakes people make, and this was a hot topic last week, is 529 plans. Those are the plans that most states have. You hear them, for example, in New York, it's New York Saves. They have them in other states. Some of them are savings plans, some of them are prepaid plans. But when I do presentations at schools, I'll always ask the audience, how many of your children have 529 plans? And oftentimes a lot of families will raise their hand and I say, guess what? You're probably wrong. I said, because that 529 plan, when you look at the statement, it's probably going to say mom or dad as owner for the student, and it'll list the student as the beneficiary, or mom or dad for the benefit of the child. That is a parent-owned 529 plan. As you saw before, the assessment is lower for parental assets. If you list that as a student asset incorrectly, your family contribution is going to be unnecessarily high, and nobody's probably ever going to ask you any questions about that. Why did you list that number that way? You'll just get less money. So if the parent owns the plan, they're looking really who owns the plan. That's what they consider. Now, a student-owned 529, those are rare. Those generally occur if you took money from a custodial account and you moved them directly into a 529 plan. Those you can't change the beneficiary, those the student owns. But for dependent students who must report parental information on the FAFSA form, those student-owned 529 plans are still considered a parent asset. So you want to be very careful with those plans, the 529s, if you have them, to make sure they're properly characterized on the form. In most cases, they're going to be the parents. Now, what about if grandma or Uncle Joe owns a 529? You can read about this later. You don't report them, but you have to be careful with the distributions because that could be untaxed income to the student that could reduce aid 50 cents on the dollar. With the new regulations, it might even reduce the aid 100% on the dollar. So again, you want to be careful taking the distributions from other people's 529 plans. Okay, now the CSS profile. Okay, so this is a detailed form. How you find out if the school wants the profile? Look at the school's own website. Some only want it for first-year students. Some may want it for all 4 years you're there. Some may only want it later on. So look at the school's website for the category. The list the College Board has on their website doesn't necessarily distinguish between first-year students, second-year students, graduate students, etc. If you don't have to fill that out, and most people don't have to fill that out, that's you can breathe a sigh of relief. However, realize one of the tip-offs of how much institutional money a school has is, do they require the CSS profile form or not? And again, that'll be on the school's guidance whether they require or not. And that form is the most important form when you're applying for financial aid, but everything has to jive with the FAFSA. So you might want to do that first and then do the FAFSA form if you can. And it could have a different deadline. So they're going to want PPY income, PY income, and possibly FY income. They're going to ask about your home. Some may look at it. Some may cap the equity or percentage of your income. That's the wild card. And then they may ask other questions about siblings, private school tuition, medical expenses, other things. It's very detailed. It's only available online. Because different schools look at the same profile differently, the outcome could be different in terms of what the school ultimately offers you in aid, even if the schools have the same cost. There's a lot more moving parts. There's little margin for error if you have to fill out the profile and the FAFSA. So mistakes can cost you thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. One point to realize with the changes coming, the government simplifying the FAFSA process. Now, as they told today at a webinar that they gave the Department of Ed, told aid officers of the schools, simple does not mean it's going to be easy. And one thing with the changes that you'll see later, the schools are not happy with FAFSA simplification. They're eliminating certain questions. Child support is going to be considered an asset, which in some cases for some low-income people may not be considered at all. Putting money in 401k plans. Currently, they add that back as untaxed income. With the FAFSA simplification, it won't be considered. So they're going to have a streamlined version of the profile, and that's something to be aware of. You might not have to fill out the FAFSA the first year, but depending on the school and what they give out in money, you might very well have to fill out that form once the FAFSA simplification takes effect, but just a streamlined version of the profile. So that's something that the rules change. You did it the first year, but there are different guidelines for returning students to re-get the money. Now, if students are living apart, I'm going to just leave this here. You can read it through later on and look at it. If you're going to a profile school, and the majority of schools don't want the profile, about 300 or so do. After simplification, I'm figuring maybe 400 or 500 will. But if you have to do that, and you, the parents, the biological adopted parents are living apart from each other, well, then you may have to fill out a non-custodial profile. That's filled out by the non-custodial parent, and that's explained on the next few slides to have to do that. There are some divorced parent specials that what I call that only want generally the profile in the past. Don't know what's coming up yet, but Vanderbilt, Rensselaer, Polytechnic, they only want it. So even though they want the profile, that doesn't necessarily mean the non-custodial parent also has to apply. There are waivers if you have trouble for that, but very likely the non-custodial parent will have to fill out a separate form. The one thing about the IRS DRT, if you can use that and you choose not to, or you revise your numbers, that's significantly going to increase the chance you're going to get selected for verification, which is the equivalent of the audit, and they're going to review more information from you that can hold things up. You may need to get copies of your transcript. If you have a high school senior, it would behoove you, if your taxes are already done, to make sure you have a copy of your tax return handy, or if not, to get a transcript from the IRS or get a copy from your tax filer. Make sure you have the W-2s, make sure you have in the 1099s, especially if you're looking at profile schools, because they may want that hard data, plus you need to have it in some cases to fill out certain answers on the application. So you want to be prepared, have that together. And this is a sample offer of aid. I have FAFSA after listed some of them because if the schools want the profile, those programs that list FAFSA may be the only type of aid you're going to receive if you only fill out the FAFSA. You won't get an institutional grant. You may not get an institutional scholarship. You may not get a work-study job. State grant may require a separate form. So you want to be very careful with that. To be sure you're filling out all the forms and not just do the FAFSA because you heard that's the only form to fill out. So many parents think that they don't know what the profile is. Optimal time to apply. If you're looking at a college that awards money on a first come, first served basis, they will tell you that. They won't give a priority deadline. Florida State is one that comes to mind. Then filing the FAFSA as soon after September 30th could be beneficial for getting more money. If you live in one of about 16 states where the timing of the FAFSA affects how much aid you get because the states run out of money or the way they work things are based on first come, first serve, those states that you want to file as soon as possible. But if you don't have those situations, then you want to file by your earliest FAFSA deadline based on the schools you're looking at, or your earliest state aid deadlines. And there are different deadlines, procedures. Again, I mentioned that. If you miss a deadline, it depends. The public universities are much more stringent about meeting it. Some private schools will give you a little leeway. I wouldn't trust it, but if you're having trouble meeting one of the requirements, contact the aid office. They might tell you it's the deadline, but your real question is, Will there be any financial penalty if I file a couple of days later or whatever? They might tell you, look, you get it in a couple of weeks, that's fine. Or they may say, no, we're firm. New York University, you blow the deadline for the profile by 1 minute, you're out of luck for institutional money for 4 years. So that's why you shouldn't generally follow the one size fits all information from the high school, because they're focusing on, again, get those FAFSAs in for the FAFSA completion program. Now, this is a map. It shows the states in yellow that award funds on a state funds available basis. They may change that list when the final FAFSA comes out, but that gives you some idea. Check with your state agency. The update: if you received unemployment compensation in 2020, if you did your taxes, depending when you filed your form, you may have gotten a money back from the IRS because of new legislation enacted in the middle of May. If you got unemployment, you want to be very careful with the FAFSA, because if you did your tax return and used the IRS data retrieval tool, and subsequently the IRS revised your tax return to give you that $10,200 per person per unemployment recipient tax break on that, your income is going to be overstated on the form. There are other issues with that as well. The slides haven't been updated. This afternoon I was on with a webinar with the Department of Ed, and they said by Friday they're going to have guidelines for the schools about unemployment. But if you had that, you want to be very careful so that you don't overstate your income. And then you can see some of the information here. And it tells you what to get if you got the unemployment later on and they gave you the money back, to CP21, or to return an account transcript. So if you fit that, look back at this tomorrow. Now, going forward, there are going to be big changes. Some are scheduled to become effective immediately. Again, they don't care anymore if your child was convicted of drug offenses while they were receiving federal aid. Students that are male don't have to register for selective service, even though the FAFSA this upcoming year is going to ask those questions. They don't care anymore. That is not going to affect your eligibility for those questions. The main provisions, though, the changes in the formula, those are scheduled to go into effect in 23-24. However, in today's seminar, they more or less alluded that because it's such a humongous lift, that they're asking Congress, they're working with them to push this back and other provisions to the 24-25 academic year. So stay tuned for that. We may not know, but remember, those years are out, but 23-24, if those regulations take effect, that's going to be the year we're in now, 2021. If they go into effect 24-25, that's going to affect the income after you sing Auld Lang Syne on New Year's Eve this year. So that's very important to realize, because that look back period, you have to plan ahead, especially if you're separated, because they may change the definition based upon who claims the child on the taxes. They're getting rid of who does the child live with. There are other changes they're making as well. So if you fit into those categories, you want to be careful doing your taxes, because that may knock you out of the box. The other parent may live in California, you live in New York. According to the new rules, they may become the custodial parent, and that's going to cause problems with state aid as well. So if you fit in those categories, you better be very careful who you claim on the taxes in 2021. You may want to even file for an extension. Most colleges are not happy, and that's why there's going to be that streamlined version of the profile that many schools that give out their own money are probably going to require you to do for 23-24, or maybe starting with 24-25. So you want to plan now for that. So again, looking at this chart.
Cal, can we start? Okay. And one change or change that has been talked about that you didn't mention is about families that have multiple students in college at the same time.
Okay. Yes, that's a good point. The multiple student adjustment. Generally speaking, for the FAFSA form, they are going to look at how many children, dependent children in the household, are going to college on at least a half-time basis. That's generally 6 credits or more for one term concurrently in the academic year with the student. The benefit of that is if there's 2 in school, they divide the parents' component of the family contribution by 2, 3 in school by 3, 4 in school, you call your bankruptcy attorney. But that's a big benefit. Now that's being eliminated with FAFSA simplification. The schools are going to have to do discretion on that. They have professional judgment they can use, but realize if schools do too many professional judgments and award more money, that triggers program reviews. So that's very careful there. Now, that may also be why some schools are going to want the profile to ask about that. The FAFSA for a year or so is still going to ask about multiple students, even when simplification goes into effect, but they are not going to automatically adjust the parent component of the family contribution by that. When they go and call the EFC, the SAI, that means they're no longer doing the multiple student adjustment to come up with that index number, which that again, that SAI, I know you may have seen articles in the media, that's not going into effect until they come up with the big lift and adjust the formula. So you can see with this chart, though, it's still going to be a complicated situation applying for aid, even with FAFSA simplification. The only thing really changing is the student, what information goes in, but that whole behemoth bureaucracy is still going to be there. And again, more schools then may want the profile because of that adjustment is being made, because schools want to retain students for their rankings. They're not happy about those changes. I said that earlier. They're not happy about that multiple student adjustment. And nor are they happy that certain income items like contributions to 401ks are being eliminated. And that's why many schools are going to do this. And it's also going to be all this new policies, procedures, new training for their staff, et cetera. So as the government said today to the aid offices, simplification does not mean it's going to be easier for you or for anybody. So that's something to be aware of. There's not been changes like this that have happened since I've been doing this and counseling families for 38 years. They have not had this big overhaul. They passed that bill. It was a similar situation in the past. Well, after we passed the bill, then let's look at it. And there are other things like family businesses may have to be assessed. That may be changed with a policy guidelines, but you want to stay tuned. And one of the things with the book is we have an update service to keep people abreast till the new book comes out next September of what's happening with these things. For now, we don't have any updates because everything's still, the crystal ball is very murky. So reasons families get less aid, some is just the income, the assets are too high. They don't get any money. But other reasons are they made mistakes, they failed to plan, they made erroneous assumptions, they had their child handle the process. The aid office made mistakes. On the Today Show years ago, financial aid office said, well, if your aid package, something happens, contact us. Maybe we made a mistake. And that happens again, because there's so many rules and regulations in play. These are more reasons, especially the bottom ones: emotions, panic, anxiety. I just want to get it over with. When I hear parents say, I just want to get over with, I'm like going, your chances of getting the most aid are going to be 2 chances to get the most aid, slim and none. Because you're going to rush, you're going to make mistakes to get it over with. And the schools are also looking with this process, how fast you close the deal. They may not be giving you your best offer, and they're trying to judge the excitability factor to determine how much aid or how little aid they're going to give you. Now, when should you hire an aid consultant? When should you not? This is strange because people realize this is what I do for a living. That I'm going to say in certain situations, it does not make sense to hire somebody. It's not for the convenience you're doing it. It's basically if you hire somebody and pay a fee, at the end of the day, are you going to get a better package and more aid hiring somebody versus doing it on your own? The colleges will tell you you can do it on your own, but that's like taking the SAT. What do you have to do to take the SAT? Pay money to the college board, sit for the exam, go there, sign your name on the paper and turn it in with no answers, and you took the SAT. So applying for aid and just submitting forms is a lot different than getting the maximum aid to reduce that family contribution. Now, if you're looking at state universities, especially out of state, again, that point before, due to their gapping, if you go to, for example, the Pennsylvania State University, my mother's alma mater, if you go there and you're not eligible for a Pell, the only aid they're going to give you based on need is a $5,500 student loan. So if your family contribution is like $7,000 and the school costs $50,000 from out of state, they're going to tell you you have to pay $43,000 even if your family contribution is only $7,000. That's why if you're looking at out-of-state universities and you have a low family contribution, out-of-state public universities are going to be very expensive because of that significant gapping, that they're not meeting the aid in full. And all the planning in the world is not going to help it at a school like that. I tell my clients applying to Penn State, this is all they're going to give you. That's the aid package, even before, but I have to file. No, that's what they're going to give you. Unless they give you merit money, you get Pell or you don't. You get a student loan for $5,500 the first year, the rest of it, you're on your own. And that could be $200,000, even though your family contribution says over 4 years, you should only pay $28,000. That's crazy, suicidal to do it. Doesn't make any sense to go to Happy Valley in those cases. And that's true with a lot of state universities. If you're looking at a community college, probably doesn't make sense. The real barometer is, do they require the profile or not? Because those schools have a large amount of institutional money. And if you increase your need, in many cases, you're going to get $1 more aid for every dollar your family contribution is calculated. The profile formula goes down. And so mistakes could cost you tens of thousands of dollars. So it's like an attorney. You know, when should you hire an attorney? If a large amount of money is at stake, and if the opposing party has also engaged professionals to assist them. And most of these schools with the profile are hiring consultants or doing that for the leveraging. So that should be the question there. Who should I hire to do it? You can do it on your own, of course, but your chances are you're going to get the most money is hard because they don't publish the formula, all the details anymore. I used to buy that, from the College Board, $1,500 a year fee. They don't sell anymore, but I know generally what the formula is, as do other consultants. I see even another one here on the chat. I give a shout out to Paula Bishop. So that's very important to understand that. So there are two types of consultants. Some only charge flat fees. That's what I do. I don't sell financial products, so I have a fiduciary relationship with my clients. I'm acting solely for their best interest. I don't sell products. There are others who do sell some financial products. That could be a conflict of interest because of the commissions on those financial products. That doesn't mean those consultants are bad, but you have to be aware that they may be also making money by selling you products that, again, may not help you increase your eligibility for aid. And realize financial planning is more than an art and than a science. I mean, it's more, than a science. It's not a cookbook recipe to follow. You learn that by the experience of doing this over and over. It's just like a doctor. You get an MD degree out of medical school. You're not ready to operate on somebody the day after you graduate. So you learn the difference between the theory and the reality that way doing this. And it's so therefore it's not best to just shop for the lowest fee. It's not like buying a box of Kraft macaroni and cheese where at this supermarket it's $2, this one it's $3, this one it's $1. I'll buy it what's worth $1. It's a personal service. It's just the same like hiring an attorney or hiring a medical professional. So how do we do? Oh, perfect timing. We're almost there.
Yep.
So do we have any questions, Debbie, that we didn't cover?
There's a question that comes up about if a student is applying early, let's say early decision, early action, does the fact that they are applying early impact money that they might receive? Like, would they receive the same money if they applied early versus if they applied regular decision?
I understand.
Regular.
Okay. That's a good question. And the answer again is, it depends on the situation. Some schools say flat out, Johns Hopkins, you go early decision, we're giving you less money. Wake Forest will say, if you really want to compare packages, we don't recommend you go early decision. That's because it's binding. Now, it does say on the contract for the Common App, et cetera, that if the aid package is not sufficient, you can get out of it. I would not do that. Your guidance counselor will be livid about that. And that can have severe consequences doing that. Also, too, you get the package, the school, the college is closed for the break, you can't appeal it, they open back up, they say you got to decide. So that's something where, too, if your situation is not the plain vanilla where we just work, maybe we have our home, we don't have much assets. If you have a more complicated situation, then that would be a good situation to hire somebody to make sure does it make sense to apply here or not. Because it doesn't do any good to get an ED and not be able to afford to go there. The early action, that's going to depend. Some schools for early action have the same deadline for aid as regular decision because you're not bound to go there till May 1st to make a decision. They don't have to give you a package. And if they don't want that, that means they're need blind and they don't care if you apply for aid and you'll apply at the same time as regular decision. So that can vary from school to school. One point about early action now. Many people do that. It's generally benefits the colleges. They want those applications in before kids hear from their early decision schools. Early decision schools also to benefit the college. Maybe they need a quarterback for the football team. They don't want 3, they don't want 2, they don't want 0 with regular decision knowing are we going to get one or not. They want to lock it in. The legacy, that may be what you have to go early decision with that. So that's very different than early action. And some schools have ED round 2 as well. That's to give you a little better notice. Now, people, the mistake, and then we'll end this question, mistake, they look at the percentages and they say, oh, well, they accept a higher percentage of students that apply early decision. The reason why that's erroneous logic is because many colleges for early decision, that's when they're accepting the recruited athletes. Those students have already been pre-vetted for admission. They know they're getting in, and there's almost 100% acceptance of those kids, which could be 15, 20% of the student body of the freshman class could be athletes. The legacies, the development cases, the people you know who pay tuition plus and write big checks to the school, 7-figure numbers. Sometimes 1 is not even enough as the first digit. Those people generally get a higher percentage. They're pre-vetted beforehand. So those numbers can be a bit deceptive for people applying early decision. That means you're going to have your child, unless you fit in one of those separate admission pools, you're going to have a better chance getting in.
Okay.
So that's something you have to balance out what to do with that.
So one thing you actually didn't mention, and I'm just kind of curious, is the net price calculator that is on colleges' websites. But this question comes up. So, and basically, should I do it? That tells me, is it accurate?
Okay.
What do I do with that information?
Okay, that's a good point. So the Department of Ed, a number of years ago, said to every college, you have to have a net price calculator. And the government doesn't audit the accuracy of it at all, which is why every school has disclaimers that it's not reliable. And it had very simplistic requirements. But many schools realize this is a good marketing trick. We will have it more robust. People can get an idea of their packages. There's also a streamlined version, My Intuition. Those ones are not very accurate. They oftentimes are garbage in, garbage out. They're oftentimes misleading as well. For example, NYU just says, what's your income level? And they have their highest income level is $100,000 plus. You'll get a $16,000 grant. So you're thinking, oh, if I make $400,000, I'm going to get $16,000 grant from NYU. No, you're getting nothing. You might get some merit money, but you're not getting any need-based grant. So it varies from them, the accuracy. They also are garbage in, garbage out. If you don't understand exactly what they mean to put into each of the questions, it comes out with an erroneous conclusion. So you could get some idea of them, but I know some parents that I've seen, the calculator said they're getting nothing and they get $40,000 in aid for the 1 year.
Right.
So they can be off by a lot. I wouldn't bet the house on their accuracy.
So the question
but
is,
they can give you some idea if your situation is simple. The one thing they do tell you, though, is if you're looking at an out-of-state public university, that they're probably not going to give you much aid unless you're looking at a school like Michigan or University of Virginia or University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which require the profile. Again, that profile is a sign that they have a large amount of their own aid that they give out. It's not just the other people's federal money, where at those state schools that give out OPM, you get what you get from the government. The rest, in many cases, you're on your own unless you get the merit money. But those calculators could give you some idea to be where your strategy is going to be. If it's way high up, your EFC, in the back of the book, we tell you how you can calculate that as well. And that's helpful because you understand the math. Or a consultant could help you with that, is that you'll then know, what am I giving up if I go ED? What are my chances of getting aid? And if you're not ready, willing, and able to pay $70,000 a year for your child to pursue their dreams, and you're probably not going to get much aid, well, then why are you applying to this school? Why are you flying there to visit it? Going and submitting the admissions application, renting a hotel to stay overnight there if it's not affordable. There's nothing, Jamie Stewart, York Prep, the former college counselor there, said to her children and to her own students, there's nothing in the Constitution that says a 4-year private college education is an inalienable right in the US Constitution. And actually, the whole aid system is based on the concept that parents and students are primarily responsible for paying for their children's college education and if a student's independent for their own education or their spouse, and that aid is only available if those resources are not sufficient. But you may feel they're not sufficient. That doesn't mean the people giving you the money determine those resources are not sufficient to do it.
Okay, so two more things. So one is kind of along those same lines, and we didn't go through this because this is like another piece of, like how much students how much the federal government lends to students and that type of stuff. But I get this question all the time. I know the answer, but I want you to answer it. I'm a parent and I'm not going to help my student go to college. Can't they get loans out by themselves?
It depends. If your child's a movie star making a large amount of money and doesn't need a co-signer for private loans, yes, they could get a loan. But generally speaking, the federal government limits the loans $5,500 for the first year undergraduate, $6,500 the second year, $7,500 for the third year each year and beyond that. So $7,500 for the fourth year, fifth year, maybe $7,500. They raised the limits on that a little bit, but at least $2,000 that must be unsubsidized, meaning the government's going to charge interest on that loan while the student's in school, and those COVID waivers are going to expire on January 31st, where those loans were interest-free in repayment or while in school. Those are ending. So they really can't get that money on their own. They're going to need a co-signer. Now, maybe the parents won't co-sign the loan, but maybe an aunt or an uncle will. But those loans are going to rely on FICO scoring. The Parent Plus loan just looks to see, do you have an adverse credit history? If you have no credit history at all as a parent, you can get a plus loan for the whatever is not covered by aid for 4 years for your child in college under the current rules. So it's a softer credit test. So you can't get, if you're not going to help, they don't necessarily care at the college. The only way there is to borrow the money. And that's a problem for independent students, undergraduates, because they can't get Parent Plus loans from the federal government because they're independent. They have the biggest problem, and they have to get private or alternative loans, which some are offered by states, some are offered by private lenders. So that varies there, but that is true. They can't borrow an unlimited amount of money. The government, in part, is doing that because they don't trust the colleges. If the money was easy, that they would the directors of finance would just jack up the tuitions more to make for the easy money. Just like they do when these tax credits come, they jack up the tuitions because they go, okay, that's other people's money now coming to the parents. They can afford still to pay more. They can afford to borrow more. So you have to realize it's like dealing with the IRS with these schools a little bit. They're not acting as charities for totally altruistic reasons for you.
Okay, so last question.
So I hope that answered the question. Okay, yes. Last one.
Okay, burst the bubble on private scholarships.
Okay, I don't have a balloon here, but I will say this about private scholarships. Remember that slide before where I said it's other people's money? Colleges want you to look for these scholarships from all these organizations. They'll tell you apply for them. The typical student who applies gets no money. The average award is maybe $1,000 to $2,000. And if the school is meeting a high percentage or need, or for other reasons for their policy, getting that outside scholarship may just result in your aid package, your need-based aid, being reduced by the amount of the outside scholarship. So I tell people in New York has a recycling program. You get a nickel for every can or bottle you redeem, unused soda, beer, whatever. That some kids would get more money spending their efforts collecting bottles and cans to pay for college than they will applying for that. Generally speaking, though, if you apply through regional, through your church, temple, or mosque, if you apply through local organizations, you'll have a better shot. If you apply for these big national awards, I live in Manhattan. You have to generally fly from the east side of Manhattan to the Hudson River on the west side of Manhattan, and then walk across it to the state of New Jersey to be fill up Yankee Stadium and take one kid who, for example, gets the Coca-Cola scholarship. 1 in 45,000 kids, 50,000 gets it. So they're not the big thing, but again, that's other people's money coming to the school. It's other revenue. So I'm not saying not to apply for them, but you want to instead focus on merit money that's awarded by the college, on the need-based money that's awarded by the colleges, the federal government, or the state government. That can be significantly much more money than the outside scholarship where you may not get a penny. And then I just want to put it here.
Yes, well, thank you, Cal. You're definitely a guru on this subject. I think that there were tremendous information that you shared. We got questions, but as we kind of hinted to people, a lot of the questions were answered as you went along in the presentation. And I just, suggest to everybody, we will have a link to this recording out tomorrow. I would watch it again because, this first time tonight, and you're probably hearing a lot of things that are new. There was a lot of information kind of on maybe a little fast. I would watch it definitely another time and maybe even a third time, kind of after you get all of your, bearings straight and you have some of your own questions. It's probably answered when you listen carefully. So thank you, Cal. And everybody also, check out the book. A lot of great information, seriously, really tremendous. And we wish everybody luck. Okay. Good night. Take care. Thanks, Cal.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Peace.